Science in the morning, science in the evening, science at supper time. When science is on the internet, you can have science anytime with Mr. Francis.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Learning Online with Mr. Francis. Today we're going to talk about body organization and tissue types. Now, we learned about this earlier in the year, but we got to go back and review everything. So, when we talk about the body, we have to talk about how it's organized. That's what organization means, how we set everything up, and the different types of tissues that we find in our body. So, let's get this party started. First off, when we talk about how it's organized, you are made up of stuff, and all living things all things actually are made up of stuff. So, for instance, this cheeseburger, it's made up of meat, cheese, tomatoes, lettuce, some bread, and some sauce on there. But it's a cheeseburger. But if we break each one of those pieces down, we can get smaller and smaller into the atoms that make it up. So, for instance, the wheat that makes up the bread, if you remember carbohydrates, the cow that makes up the meat and creates the cheese, that's our proteins and our lipids. We've got tomatoes, which are a fruit, by the way. They have seeds. It's a fruit. They make up the more carbohydrates and fiber that we can find in this. And then we got some lettuce that doesn't do too much, but it makes it look pretty, doesn't it? So this cheeseburger is made up of a bunch of other stuff that forms into one. Just like you and I, we're made up of other stuff that forms into one bigger thing. So, what is this stuff made of? Well, the words matter, okay? Matter. You matter because you're made up of matter, because you take up space. Both you and I, we take up space. So we are matter. Um, the rock takes up space. He matters. A regular rock you might find outside takes up space. It's matter. Okay, the air the breath that you breathe out or the air that you breathe in, that's all matter because it takes up space. Even a fart takes up space. Okay, this good boy here, he's a good doggo, he takes up space. It's matter. Remember, you are matter, so you do matter. Don't forget it. But what is matter made of? So all this stuff takes up space, but what's it made of? Well, first off, when we talk about atom, the smallest unit of stuff or matter is called an atom. Okay, so here's a picture of an atom you might have seen from a cartoon in your past. Now, it's not a real atom, of course, it's a drawing. Atoms are super duper tiny. When we talk about atoms, they're made up of three things we call subatomic particles. First off, we have electrons, which have a negative charge, and they hang out on the outside of the atom. Then we have protons, which are positive, which hang out in the nucleus of the atom, and neutrons, which are also in the nucleus of an atom. Different atoms have different numbers of protons, electrons, and neutrons, and they give us different things called elements. So, depending on the number of protons that an atom has, it's a different type of element. And if you remember, an element is a pure substance, okay? It's only made of one type of atom. Some of the atoms that we've talked about, or elements we've talked about so far, are chinops. Remember that one? Chinops, chinops. C for carbon, H for hydrogen, N for nitrogen, O for oxygen, P for phosphorus, and S for sulfur. Those are the elements of life. That's what you and I are made out of. All living things are made out of chinops and some other stuff, but these are the big ones. Now, sometimes atoms can join forces and they form these things called molecules. So when two atoms or more join together, we've got what we call a molecule. Now, you maybe have heard of molecule of water before. Now, some atoms, they don't like other atoms. They always keep by themselves. You could say they're a loner, okay? We call these noble gases. Now, they're molecules because they hang out by themselves, but they're not going to connect to any other different types of elements out there. Some of them like to join together, and different types of atoms for that elements, for instance, they join together, and we call those a compound. So a compound is when we have two different types, and a molecule is just a different type of compound. It gets a little confusing. So, for instance, our noble gases that don't join with any other types of atoms, well, right here, you see these a lot in neon signs. We pass electricity through these gases, and they light up just like these. Salt is what we call a compound. Yeah, you like those on your french fries, right? NaCl. So that's a sodium ion. An ion just means it has a charge, either positive or negative, which we can break down into cations and anions, but we're not going to get into that. So it's sodium and chlorine, and those together make delicious table salt. That's a compound. Same thing with water. Water is a compound because it's H2O. So that means we've got hydrogen and oxygen. Now, oxygen by itself, the kind you breathe, O2, that's considered just a molecule because it's only oxygen, nothing else. Now, when we've got molecules that work together, we form these things called organelles. Maybe you've heard of these before. I'm sure you have. Organelles are like the little tiny organs inside a cell that make it work. Each one has its own job. For instance, I know you all know the mitochondria, even if it's just from a meme online. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, creates ATP. Uh-oh, ATP. Let's sing the song. ATP is good enough for me. ATP equals energy. Okay, so anyway, we've got the mitochondria that makes energy. We've got the Golgi apparatus that packages, sorts, and modifies proteins for export. We got the nucleus that holds all the DNA, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read through everything and go over it, but inside our cells, we have a bunch of organelles, and together they work to form a cell. Okay, so when we talk about cells, oh, this is all out of order. First off, the cell is the smallest unit of life. It's the smallest thing that can be alive. One single cell can be alive. You, on the other hand, you're made of about, on average, 37.2 trillion cells, and that's a huge number. You can see it right there on the screen. I wrote it for you. That's a huge number. Just to put that into perspective, if you were to count out loud from 0 to a billion, just a billion, not even 37 billion, just a trillion, just to a billion, it would take anywhere between 244 to 285 years of counting out loud if you spent 16 hours a day doing it. That's a massive amount of numbers, okay? Like it's absurd. A trillion is gigantic. 37 trillion? Unthinkable. Okay, now if we've got a bunch of cells that work together, we end up with a thing called a tissue, okay? Tissues work together, and they have the same general function. Depending on the tissue that we're talking about, they do different things. For instance, when we talk about tissues, we have 4 different types. We have nervous tissue. We can find that in our brain, our spinal cord, and our nerves. We have epithelial tissue. We find that on our skin. Okay, so our flesh on the outside there. It's also lining the inside of our body cavities. Our muscles we find in our heart, on our skeleton, and in our organs. And lastly, our connective tissue, which is the stuff that connects everything together, like our bones and tendons and fat. Okay? Now, when we have a bunch of tissues that work together, we form things called organs. We have different organs that do different things in our body, and you know we went over all the different organs that have different jobs, but they are made up of a bunch of tissues that have the same role. For instance, the stomach is made of tissues that work together to do the stomach's job, so on and so forth. If we take all the human organs that are in this picture and we start adding them together, certain ones work with each other. When they work with each other, we get something called an organ system. Okay, and we have 11 organ systems in the human body. Now you might look at these pictures here and go, well, Mr. Francis, that's 12. You need to learn how to count. Yes, but we've got the male and female reproductive system right down here. So you have one or the other. And then you have the other 10 that go along with it. So we've got the digestive system, the muscular system, the integumentary system, the lymphatic system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, the skeletal system, the reproductive system, the respiratory system, the urinary system, and the circulatory system. When all of those work together in harmony, that's when we have an organism like you, okay? Or Keanu Reeves, or this little adorable kitty, or maybe even this fly. All of these things work together with their different systems to function correctly and live their life and fulfill the 7 characteristics of life. Let's talk about tissues that we find in the body. First off, there's 4 different types of tissues. We have connective tissue like Connect 4 up here. Everything touches. Okay, epithelial tissue like the skin that's being peeled off. Hopefully that doesn't gross you out too much. We got some muscle tissue. Okay, muscle tissue helps us do a bunch of stuff. And lastly, nervous tissue that allows us to send messages, like when you smash your face against a glass window, just like that guy up there. So connective tissue, it supports, binds, and separates other organs, and it also includes cartilage, fat, and elastic tissues. Okay. Also, our blood is considered a connective tissue. Everything's connected by these things. Not going to go too crazy about this. The epithelial tissue. Epithelial is stuff all over your body, like your skin. It's also in the inside of our body. And our glands are mostly made out of this type of tissue. They have lots of different functions. like protection, secretion, absorption, excretion, filtration, diffusion, and sensory reception. Okay, so they help us feel stuff. They don't send the message, but they help us get that message to where it needs to go. Muscle tissues help us move. That's really it. Each type of muscle tissue does something to move. For instance, by contracting or releasing, our skeletal muscles help us move our arms around or any of our bones. Our smooth muscle pushes stuff through our body, and our cardiac muscle pumps our heart. So each type of muscle moves something in our body. Each one has a function. And then we have our nervous tissue. Now, nervous tissue is the tissue that allows us to feel stuff, okay, to send messages from one place to the other. Think about like wires in your house. Electrical wires send messages to different things, and you hit a light switch, it travels through a wire and turns on a light. That's our nervous system if we were a house. A nervous system just sends this little electrical signal throughout our body to tell us to do things. Like when you touch something really hot, you might drop it real quick, or if you stub your toe, you're going to, if you're like me, you're going to cry and you're going to skip around because that's, how it goes. But okay, guys, that's a quick review of what we've gone over this cycle, and hope all is well. Have a good one.